The story of Jesus is one of the most influential narratives in human history. It has inspired billions, shaped civilizations, and given rise to traditions that continue even today. Yet behind the devotion and reverence, there are claims of hidden truths, political manipulations, and silent deceptions that transformed a man's message into an empire's foundation. The first deception lies in the silence of history itself. Roman records from the period mention countless events, leaders, and even obscure figures, yet the life of Jesus is strangely absent from official chronicles. Historians argue that what we know comes mostly from texts written decades later, shaped less by memory and more by belief. Another hidden layer is the rewriting of identity. Early followers of Jesus saw him as a prophet, a teacher, and a reformer within Judaism. But as the years passed, his image was reshaped, elevated beyond humanity into divinity. This transformation served both faith and politics, but it blurred the line between history and theology. The role of Rome cannot be ignored. When Christianity began to spread, it faced persecution. But eventually, Rome embraced it, not as a rebellion, but as a tool of control. The Jesus narrative became less about his teachings of humility and more about obedience to empire, reshaped to unify people under a single authority. Scripture itself reveals traces of conflict. Different Gospels describe the same events in different ways. Some accounts were accepted, while others were rejected and labeled heretical. The selection of which books to include in the New Testament was not accidental. It was a decision influenced by councils, bishops, and political needs. Hidden beneath the surface are the voices that were silenced. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary Magdalene tell stories that differ from the official version. These writings were excluded, banned, and in some cases destroyed, leaving only fragments that hint at a more complex and controversial past. Even the crucifixion, the central event of Christian faith, is surrounded by questions. Was it purely a spiritual sacrifice, or also a political execution meant to silence a man who threatened religious and imperial authority? History suggests that crucifixion was Rome's punishment for rebels, not saints. The resurrection, too, raises debates. For believers, it is the miracle that defines faith. For historians, it is an event described only through the testimony of followers, not through independent evidence. This divide between faith and fact has fueled centuries of questioning and doubt. The image of Judas as the great betrayer is another possible deception. Some ancient writings suggest Judas acted not out of treachery, but obedience, fulfilling a role given by Jesus himself. Yet the official story painted him as a villain, ensuring the narrative carried a lesson of loyalty and betrayal. The figure of Mary Magdalene also carries mystery. While the Gospels present her as a follower and witness, later traditions recast her as a sinner. Some suppressed texts even hint at her closer relationship to Jesus. Redefining her identity shifted the focus away from female authority within the early movement. The Church's rise depended on controlling narrative. By declaring some ideas orthodox and others heresy, leaders secured unity. But in doing so, they erased diversity of thought among the earliest followers. The result was a single narrative, polished and powerful, but one that concealed its origins of conflict. Translations introduced yet another layer of deception. Ancient words shifted meaning, as texts moved from Hebrew to Greek, from Latin to English. A single mistranslated term could change theology. For centuries, ordinary people depended on clergy to interpret Scripture, giving power to those who claimed to hold truth. Art and imagery added to this transformation. The image of Jesus as a pale, European figure has no basis in history, yet it dominated culture for centuries. This deception shaped perception, distancing him from his Middle Eastern origins and aligning him with the identity of those who held power. Prophecy was also retrofitted into the story. Passages from older scriptures were reinterpreted to present Jesus as their fulfillment. Whether these prophecies were genuinely linked or reimagined later remains debated, but the effect was powerful. A story woven seamlessly into a divine plan. Over time, rituals replaced teachings. The call for compassion, justice, and humility was overshadowed by ceremonies, hierarchy, and wealth. Cathedrals rose while the poor still suffered. This, too, was a deception, transforming a message of service into a system of authority. The Middle Ages deepened these distortions. The Jesus narrative was used to justify wars, persecutions, and conquests. Crusades marched under his name, yet their actions betrayed the peace he preached. This contradiction revealed how far the narrative had drifted from its origins. Yet, in every age, voices have risen to question these deceptions. Scholars, historians, and reformers searched for the man behind the myth. They asked whether the Jesus remembered by history is the same as the Jesus who once walked the earth. The greatest deception may not be a single lie, but the layering of truth and myth over centuries. What began as the story of a teacher became the foundation of power, altered and retold until fact and faith became nearly indistinguishable. Today, the narrative continues to inspire, but also to divide. It stands as a reminder of how history can be reshaped, how truth can be hidden, and how stories become instruments of both hope and control. To study these deceptions is not to dismiss faith, but to understand how power has shaped belief. The story of Jesus, with all its deceptions and revelations, is not just about one man. It is about humanity's struggle with truth, memory, and meaning. Behind every hidden layer lies the question that history cannot silence. What was real and what was rewritten?